Hey, everybody. I'm back with another Michael Rossi translation. I thought I would try to stay on top of them in the new year, Dr. Rossi. As always, the first minute of the stream, I say the reason I make these is because Dr. Rossi does these excellent translations, and I just know myself, and I would be way more likely to listen to this if I could just walk and listen to it. So I read it for Dr. Rossi, but I always say if you want to give me money, give it to him first. His Patreon's in the description page. If you still got a little bit left over and you appreciate me reading these, trying to disseminate them wide of a redneck American audience as possible. It's fun to read Lavrov in the basement in rural Missouri. My buy me a coffee and Patreon's in the bottom as well. But without further ado, you want to hear Lavrov, so let's do it. Share the tab. All right. Make it big. Get me out of there. Turn it down. And let's go. This should do it. Dear colleagues, we will start the press conference of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergey Lavrov. I would like to remind you that Russian will be translated into 4 languages after the introductory speech. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, but no more than one each. Please identify yourself when you ask your question. I now turn the floor over to Sergey Lavrov. Go ahead. Thank you. Good day, dear colleagues. Our tradition has been to meet at the beginning of the new year to discuss the results and events of the past year. 2022 was difficult and even unique to some extent. It reflected deep-rooted trends in geopolitics and the international aspirations of the leading stage, which had been brewing for more than a decade. Our Western colleagues tried to turn Ukraine and the developments around it into the main media, political, and economic event. Accusing the Russian Federation of the troubles in the global economy because of its aggression against Ukraine. I do not want to dwell on refuting these assertions. The statistics of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, and other international agencies convincingly show that the crisis had been developing long before the start of the special military operation. President Putin repeatedly cited data showing the emergence of negative phenomena in the global economy, primarily due to the egoistic position of the United States and its allies. What is happening in Ukraine now is the result of preparations by the U.S. and its satellites for the start of a global hybrid war against the Russian Federation. Nobody is hiding this fact. This is clear from statements by unbiased Western politologists, scientists, and politicians. In his recent article, Ian Bremmer, political science professor at Columbia University, wrote, "We are not in a Cold War with Russia. We are in a hot war with Russia. Now it's a proxy war, and NATO is not fighting it directly. We are fighting it through Ukraine. This admission is frank, and this conclusion is on the surface. It is strange that some people try to refute it. Recently, President of Croatia, Zoran Milanovic, said that this is a NATO war, an open and honest statement. Several weeks ago, Henry Kissinger, before he urged NATO to accept Ukraine in his recent article, wrote in clear terms that the events in Ukraine were a clash, a rivalry of two nuclear powers for that territory. It is clear enough what he meant. Our Western partners are cunning while vehemently trying to prove that they are not fighting Russia, but are only helping Ukraine respond to an aggression and restore its territorial integrity. The scale of their support makes it clear that the West has staked a great deal on its war against Russia. This is obvious. The events surrounding Ukraine have brought to light the implicit push by the United States to drop attempts to reinforce its global position with legitimate means and to adopt illegitimate methods to ensure its dominance. Anything goes. Once revered mechanisms and institutions that were created by the U.S.-led West have been discarded, and not because of what we are seeing in Ukraine. Free market, fair competition, fair enterprise, the inviolability of property, and the presumption of innocence. In a word, everything the Western globalization model relied on collapsed overnight. Sanctions have been imposed on Russia and other objectionable countries that do not comply with these tenets and mechanisms. Clearly, sanctions can be imposed anytime on any country which, in one way or another, refuses to mindlessly follow American orders. The European Union has been completely subsumed by this U.S. dictatorship. There's no point in discussing this at length. The signing of the joint declaration on EU-NATO cooperation on January 10th was the high point of this process. Something that has been in the making for several years. It states explicitly that the alliance and the EU's goal is to use military means in the interests of the golden billion. This is exactly what it says. In the interests of the 1 billion residents of NATO. And the EU countries. The rest of the world, to quote High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Borrell, is a jungle, quote unquote, that stifles, quote unquote, are therefore be reformed, adjusted their needs. And to style colonies in order to use new methods to ruthlessly pump out resources from them. These methods are all too familiar and include demonization, blackmail, sanctions, threats of force, and much more. The West's course on destroying traditional ties between historical partners in different regions and fragmenting and destabilizing them has become more salient. We can see this in the Balkans and in the post-Soviet space. especially if we take a closer look at what the United States, their quote unquote clients and quote unquote fixers are doing in Central Asia and the South Caucasus. Everything that is happening around Ukraine has been in the making for a long time. The first Maidan protest took place in 2004, when European officials declared for the first time that Ukraine had to choose sides and decide who it was with, the West or Russia. Since then, this either-or approach has been consistently promoted by the West in its policies in this region. Those who choose the wrong side or believed that their historical and family ties and their traditions and religious beliefs bonded them with the Russian Federation, even though they lived in Ukraine, were at first more or less delicately and then ruthlessly ground down, excluded from political life, and criminally prosecuted. They killed intractable journalists and politicians and closed media outlets that did not promote the official point of view. The creation of a police-run Nazi state was in full swing. In fact, it has now been created with the blessing of the West. They used the, quote, either with the West or Russia, unquote, choice to identify those who were against the West, and proceed to severely punish them. Coming back to the NATO-EU declaration, this is an interesting document. These two organizations are being presented as an alliance of democracies against autocracies amid global rivalry. A patently confrontational agenda has been announced for the world to hear. Europe has waived its independence. The joint declaration directly subordinates Europe to NATO. It includes commitments to serve U.S. interests in matters of geopolitical containment of Russia and China. They're clear, but out in black and white, is to enable the U.S.-led alliance to achieve global preeminence. NATO is not limited to organizing life on the European continent. In June 2022, NATO's Madrid summit declared that the military bloc had a global commitment, specifically in relation of the Asia-Pacific region, which they call the Indo-Pacific region. It is clear that they are attempting to make overtures to India to create additional problems in its relations with China. Their battle cry is indivisibility of security in the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific regions. Mere wordplay. Since the 1990s, the same commitment to the principle of indivisibility of security was declared by the OSCE and Russia-NATO Council. This term was used to mean equal security for every state and an obligation not to strengthen one's own security at the expense of another's. Now it has been taken out of context and given a new meaning. The indivisibility of interests of NATO and the Indo-Pacific region. The difference is obvious. In the so-called Indo-Pacific region, the West is out to create bloc architecture against Russia and China, the PRC. With this aim in view, they have consistently been destroying, although they prefer to keep quiet about this, the decades-old mechanisms and formats of cooperation created around ASEAN based on equality, consensus, and balance of interests. Instead, they are putting together military blocs. A shining case in point is AUKUS, an Anglo-Saxon bloc in Asia, which includes the US, the UK, and Australia. Japan is under pressure to join it as well. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's recent visit to Washington ended up confirming this course. Japan is militarizing again. As I understand it, Japan is bracing. Alter the articles in its constitution to prevent it from doing this. The process is underway. I will not speak now about the West's actions in other geopolitical areas. Today we regard the policies of the US and the West as a whole as the main problem creating difficulties in all areas. In short, this is what it means. Washington's policy of dictate in international affairs means precisely that the Americans can do anything, anywhere they want, even at the other end of the earth. They do what they think is necessary. All other countries cannot do anything without the US's approval, even in response to direct security threats the US creates on their borders. It's quite simple. Like Napoleon, who mobilized nearly all of Europe against the Russian Empire, and Hitler, who occupied the majority of European countries and hurled them at the Soviet Union, the United States has created a coalition of nearly all European member states of NATO and the EU and is using Ukraine to wage a proxy war against our country. With the old aim of finally solving the Russian question, like Hitler, who sought a final solution to the Jewish question. Today, I'll tell you about these Western politicians, not only from the Baltics and Poland, but also from more reasonable. Активно рассуждают о том, что нужно деколонизировать Россию. Опять, дескать, она слишком большая и мешается нам здесь. Countries say that Russia must be dealt a strategic defeat. Some political analysts write about decolonizing Russia, that our country is too big and gets in the way. The other day I read an item in the Telegraph that called for liberating Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Transnistria, while leaving Karelia, Kosnetsburg, and the Kuril Islands for negotiations. Of course, it is a tabloid, but we have to read yellow sheets because they sometimes make headline news. Quite a few such statements have been made, including in our non-system opposition. No Western politician has refuted them. President Macron, who proposed creating a European political community as a format, which all European countries apart from Russia and Belarus will be invited to join, has also suggested a conference of European states for the EU's Eastern Partnership countries, Georgia, Ukraine, the Belarus will be the participants as the
Беларусь, я сомневаюсь, что они будут приглашать, но вот сказано Евросоюз
Eastern Partnership countries, plus, note this, politically active immigrants from Russia, it has been said, not in Macron's presentation. But in subsequent comments, some Russian regions, which are trying to maintain ties with Europe, could be involved. I believe everything is clear. It is not a black. It reflects their strategy of global domination and unconditional suppression of all countries on pain of punishment. The Western politicians are talking only about sanctions. Ursula von der Leyen has recently said in Davos that new sanctions will be imposed on Russia and Belarus, that they know which sanctions to adopt to strangle the Russian economy and cause it decades of regression. This is what they want. They have shown their true colors. For many years, the UN Security Council members discussed sanctions against countries that violated international law or their obligations. And every time the Western countries that initiated such measures promised that the sanctions would not harm the people, but would be targeted at the quote-unquote regime. What became of their promises? They openly say that sanctions against Russia are designed to incite the people to rise in a revolution to overthrow the current leaders. Nobody is observing or intends to observe proprieties any longer, but their reaction and frenzied attempts to ensure by hook or by crook, in foul means possible, the domination of the U.S. and the West, which Washington has already brought to heel, is proof that, historically, they are acting contrary to the objective course of events by trying to stop the rise of a world. Such change does not happen on orders from the high offices on the Potomac or in any other capital, but for natural reasons. Countries developing economically. Look at China and India, our strategic partners. Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, Egypt. And many African countries, considering their immense natural resources, their development potential is enormous. New centers of economic growth are emerging. The West is trying to prevent this, in part, by exploiting the mechanisms created to service its interests within the globalization framework it created. The role of the dollar as a reserve currency is very important in this respect. This is why in our contacts through the SCO, BRICS, the CIS, and the EAEU, and in our cooperation with associations of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, we are doing all we can to create new forms of interaction, to avoid dependence on the West and its neo-colonialist methods that are now clear. Putin spoke about this frankly and clearly. These methods are used with the express purpose of robbing the rest of the world in these new conditions. In dealing with our reliable partners and friendly countries, we are developing forms of cooperation that will benefit all of us. Those who want to subdue the entire world in dealing with our reliable partners and have no say in it. These are my thoughts on the past year. The main point is that the processes that took place did not start yesterday. But many years ago, they will continue still. It takes time to create a multipolar world and finalize the relations needed for the triumph of democracy and justice, and for the observance of the UN Charter principle of respect for the sovereign equality of all states. The UN Charter is a good foundation. At the time it was adopted, it was a revolutionary document. Unfortunately, the West distorted all its correct principles. It did not respect the principles of sovereign equality of states, non-interference in internal affairs, and peaceful settlement of disputes. The United States used its armed forces abroad hundreds of times since the establishment of the UN. In the majority of cases, it crudely violated the UN Charter. It will take a long time to create a multipolar world order. This will take an entire historical era. We are now in the midst of this process. Sometimes, direct participants of such major events do not see everything immediately. This is why we value so greatly that we are in constant contact and share our opinions and impressions with each other. I am referring not only to our foreign partners, but also to media colleagues. Your observations and the questions that you want to ask are useful for us. All right. So as always, I recommend you to go to Michael Rossi's channel here and subscribe. Thanks for stopping by, Jenny and Gavin. If you guys appreciate the content, we'll put this up again for Mr. Rossi, just in case. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be able to read it and do my part in trying to educate America and prevent World War III. I feel like if most people just knew the other side or could hear it, if it wasn't kept from us, there wouldn't be much chance. So there's Michael's right there. And Buy Me a Coffee is my favorite one. There's a Patreon one too, but I like Buy Me a Coffee. It's slick. There's mine there. I was telling my wife today, she said, just talking about Russia. She's like, why did they, what's going on? Did they just invade or, and I was like, well, pretty much the western part of Ukraine, left of the Dnieper River, it was Galicia, I think it was called. And those people tend to identify much more with Europe and, dare I say, the Yahtzee regime, the bordering countries there. And then east of the Dnieper River, the regions that have broken off identify much closer with not only Russia, but with the Soviet Union. That's why they call themselves the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic. And it clicked in my mind that I told her, I was like, so it's like a civil war between Yahtzees to the left and Soviets to the right of the country of Ukraine. And Russia's protecting the Russians in the eastern regions, and Europe is siding with the western regions. And I realized I explained this in less than a minute. And if that was just on the news every night, how in the world could they justify these trillions of dollars going to Western Ukraine? I don't think they could. So once again, Michael, I don't think we do this for the money. We do it to prevent World War III. I watched your comeback video a couple weeks ago, 5 minutes ago. I really enjoyed that. And I think we're on the same page there. And uh, I'm the same way. I love that they're there. It really takes a lot of effort for me to sit down and read it. So I'm just trying to make Michael's work more accessible, spread it far and wide. But Mike, I hope you enjoy what I'm doing. You reached out before and gave me the thumbs up, so I'm gonna keep going. And we need to get an email contact one way or another. But I really appreciate you, brother. I think you're a man after my own heart. So yep. I hope this gets out to a few more people. I love y'all. I'm gonna start a new stream and read some books. Peace out and God bless.